Jeff Rose, please.
My question has to do with the system. I have some concerns as it relates to our lack of system advice. I don't think system necessarily strips teachers and districts from autonomy. I actually think in some ways it allows teachers and school districts to do their best work. And right now, I have some concerns, not just related to the state of Oregon, but our country, in regards to systems. I don't think we have them. I don't think we have a system and a focus in this country, as well as a priority on education. I'm curious as to what you see as it relates to other nations right now in reference to system of education, which maybe we can detach from funding just for a minute.
Okay. That's a very, very good question. I wish that I was more knowledgeable than I am on the topic. I used to believe that we couldn't have a system in this country. I devised what I call the Jesse test, which is you never come up with a system in this country that would please Jesse Helms, Jesse Jackson, and Jesse Ventura. That joke also will have its term limit soon, as they're fading from me. And so in a book I wrote in the 1990s, I said we ought to have a dozen systems here. And I actually talk about those systems would be available all around the country. And I always used to say you could go from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, and you'd have the same choice of systems. And you know, we do it for telephone carriers and for airplanes, so it's not technically impossible. But as I said earlier in response to the other people, I think we are moving toward a national system, and if the Massachusetts model is followed, it's a lot better than what I had feared. I wouldn't want the Mississippi model, which is, alas, the opposite in every way. And there's no question that many countries do have systems, and they can be stifling, as the French system was for many years, or they can be rather imaginative and liberating, as the Scandinavian systems have been. They do require, as I said in my prepared remarks, more of a sense of a nation than we now have. I mean, if we can't agree on any legislation, it would be kind of magic if all of a sudden, the Mississippi tiger lies down with the Massachusetts lily on the Mississippi River. I think that would be unlikely. But you're right. A system that people more or less buy into saves you a lot of water for wear and tear. But a couple of other comments. One, the movie Waiting for Superman, which I haven't seen, has interesting ideas for the short run. Teach for America, KIPS, Harlem Children's Zone, which is better funded than most nations. But they need, none of them is a national solution. I mean, Wendy Kopp hopes to double the core of Teach for America from 7,500 to 15,000 teachers, 60% of whom aren't going to be teaching 3 years from now. Meanwhile, we've got 3 or 5 million teachers, so it's not going to be a national, it's not going to be a long-term solution. I think that the only long-term solution is to wed whatever kind of system or systems we come up with a much higher degree of professionalization. When I went to Finland and Singapore back to back, I had a hypothesis about the 4 things they would have in common. And I was right about all of them, but I missed the 5th, which is really important, and I think you might not have anticipated it either. One is that the population is small. We can't do that. 2, it's rather homogeneous. We can't do that. 3, parental involvement with kids. We can do more than that. And parental involvement doesn't mean that parents went to college. It meant the parents care and the children know that the parents care. And of course, it helps to have parents at home. Number 4, a selective, well-compensated teaching cohort with a clear professional trajectory, which isn't teaching 4th grade for 40 years, because that's the only other option is becoming assistant superintendent or principal. And those are the things I anticipated. But what I didn't anticipate, and I said this I think earlier, is they're very flat systems. They're equally funded. You walk into a class, you don't right away know, this is upper middle class, even if they didn't go to school, they'd still get to go to Harvard. And this place is underfunded in every way, and it has very poor social capital and human capital, and you have to be super kids to do anything. And so the system, I guess this is the answer to your question, Jeff. If the system isn't wedded, on the one hand, to professionalization, on the other hand, to some kind of equating of resources, or even giving greater resources to the greater need, the fact that the system is meaningless. And the best proof of it, I realize, is that the reason we have No Child Left Behind, and the reason we had Goals 2000, is because Ted Kennedy and others on the left joined forces with Orrin Hatch and other people on the right. But there was an assumption there of funding, which wasn't matched. And so, in a way, systemic reform, a term that you know, was designed to put the system in place. But if other things like professionalization, equating with funding wasn't in place, you're just rearranging deck chairs.
Well, we're saddled with a system that's 100 and some odd years old. Actually came out of the Committee of 10. It was chaired by the president of Harvard University. And the Committee of 10 actually did some revolutionary things, like an 8-year, 4-year expected sequence of elementary and secondary education. A certain standardized curriculum that all children were entitled to receive. And we saw out of that the evolution of things like teacher licensing and other ways of guaranteeing at the time that this system would be delivered equitably to all children. We're now saddled with the same system, and I think you're challenging us to have a different level of discourse as a community about what we want for our kids and what those expectations should be. The problem that I see, we're involved here in Multnomah County with a project that looks at both academic indicators and social and community indicators from birth through career entry as a way of trying to benchmark how are we doing as a community toward preparing our kids for the future. So my question is difficulty in bringing an entire community into a conversation that addresses the complexity of the interrelationship.
Well, it's interesting that you use the word community, because the kind of presupposition of the previous question is in most of my remarks were that this has now become a national conversation. And that's a huge change for those of you who are under 30 or 40, because education in the days of the Committee of 10 and for 50 years afterwards was really a local institution, and only with the 1960s was there any kind of a federal presence. And I guess one place that the left and the right could join forces, and I'm not running for office, would be to have some radical experiments in cities of a very different way of thinking about education. I mean, we've thought about that in terms of taxing in states and, redistribution and so on. And here's where I'm not going to be particularly politically correct. I don't think everybody needs to go to college, and I certainly don't think everybody needs to go to college when they're 18. In fact, I think for over half the population, it's not a good use of resources. I'd love to give everybody a chip and say use it when you're ready, and don't necessarily go to college when all you want to do is to have your parents pay a lot of money so you can social network, and I speak from experience. And I think, some of the vocational education that's done in Europe is things we should be emulating. My friend Dana has my yellow jacket over there, or maybe it's under there. Actually, it's under you, Meryl. Can you hold up my yellow jacket? This comes from the Danish metalworkers. I've been wearing it for 25 years. They have a terrific apprentice system for kids, and they're a lot happier becoming good metalworkers than they are reading Howard Gardner, which all the freshmen at Bucknell were signed. Nothing but complaints. So I think it's time for some radical experiments, both in a Leon Botstein sense of sending some kids to college when they're ready, which could be at 14 or 15, and having a much more varied set of pathways. Because one wonderful thing about America, since I've been bashing America, it's a country of infinite second chances. In Germany, if you get the wrong track at 10, it's terribly difficult to get here. Here, you know, you can screw up until you're 40 and you can run for office in most states, right? I fear it's becoming a job requirement in Delaware and New York and so on. The other thing, here again, Robert, I'm finishing up Neil. The Robert Wright book is actually very informative because I'm very fortunate. People like me who are well off and who have opportunities, we can live in this America fine because we simply buy the services that we need. And so we completely cut off from what, so to speak, ordinary people need. And either we can endorse that, and I guess that's called oligarchy or plutocracy, or we can say, you know, we want to be much more generous with our money and our time to build a real community. And I think that's what the MetroArts is about, and that's what Robin Hood in New York is about. And we don't want to make it forced, but I think we want to make it good form. And you know, I don't think Bill Gates and Warren Buffett need to have even the $30 billion, which they will have if we get half their money away, but the Promise Project, or at least to give half their money away, is a good start, and if that becomes a model of participation, I think the economic problems, which you all referred to, will be a little bit less severe. So sorry if that was more than 3 minutes.
I have a couple of brief announcements, and I do want to ask one question I feel obligated to ask. First of all, Michael Geisler, 2008 Teacher of the Year, National Teacher of the Year, will be speaking beginning approximately at 11 o'clock. But in about 10 minutes, he's going to start a presentation with a film that's going to be here, and feel free to come and go during that period. We're only going to take, I think, a 20-minute break at this point. But I do feel obligated to ask a question because we didn't have time to get questions from the audience, which Howard and I both wanted to ask. So I'm going to ask one. And that is, what is the appropriate role of teachers in relating to their school districts and working on, with, and about the curriculum? How much influence can teachers have, should teachers have, in terms of forming what they're going to teach in their classroom and how they're going to teach it, and how do they interact with their superintendents, their boards, and their communities to participate in the curriculum process?
Well, the interesting thing about Finland and Singapore is teachers are actually given a lot of autonomy within the systemic framework. And that's because good professionals need to be able to make judgments about complex issues under conditions of uncertainty. And all kids are not the same, and the same lesson which worked brilliantly one year flops the next year. So in that sense, to the extent that teachers are deeply professionalized and seen as cogs in a wheel, which is not of their own design or worry, you don't have a good educational system. But the other side of the coin is, and this is where the Jeff systemic thing is important, teachers need to know what's done before. They shouldn't teach the Revolutionary War 5 times in a row just because they don't know that, what happened to the 4 previous years. There needs to be a general understanding of the sequence and of the choice points so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's also what happens in a good professional outfit. And being lucky enough to be at a university which is highly professional, you have to keep doing it. And the curriculum at Harvard, which was good even 5 years ago, needs to be retweaked. And if it isn't retweaked by us, somebody else is going to retweak it. So it's great responsibility for both parties.